I have here someone who needs no introduction, so I'm not going to give him one. Chris.
Well, I thought you'd give me a build-up, saying one of the most gifted broadcasters in
All right, he is one of the most
world.
gifted broadcasters.
What I've ever had the
world.
pleasure to meet, I think we can
what
say.
I've ever had the pleasure to meet.
Thank you.
Chris, thank you for doing this.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm a bit puzzled why there are 3 live cats and a dead pine marten on the table, but...
Well, because people love cats, and I love cats.
They don't seem to like pine martens.
Well, that's very strange.
Stuffed.
That's a stoat. Do you know how you can tell the difference between a stoat and a weasel? Well, the weasel is weaselly identified because the stoat's totally different. Now, tell me your story about these.
I have a very good relationship with some journalists.
Yeah.
Done interviews with some of them time and time again because they're decent, honest folk. I've also had periods of my life when I've been surrounded by journalists who I didn't like very much and paparazzi popping up. They actually did once go through my dustbins, I remember.
Really?
Well, there was nothing there, a lot of old fish
But this
bait.
was when you were a huge star.
Yeah,
with,
well, I think it started... Thank you. What a nice man. I think when Who Wants to Be a Millionaire started, and we were sponsored by the Sun newspaper.
Sponsored by
Yeah,
the Sun.
so we got written about very nicely in the Sun, obviously. But all the others were trying to dig some dirt up about me, about the show, about it's all a crook or whatever.
So not information, but dirt.
Just dirt, really, to, you know, knock me off in pedestal and knock the show off its pedestal. It was huge. I mean, when Millionaire started, it was just colossal.
It was the number one.
That was probably, I mean, I was very naive. Sorry, I've just stood on a cat. I was very naive. But I think then the sort of phone hacking was starting because there were, you know, that strange thing when you're talking to someone on the phone, you sort of think there's somebody else listening.
I never had that experience.
Oh, yeah, I've had that. Because you used to have those things like tied lines and things. And I thought, I never said anything about it. I just thought it was, you know, a rubbish phone that I was using. And then when I split from my wife, I mean, it became just open season. And they were everywhere. You know, they were trying to get at my children. They were obviously trying to talk to my ex-wife.
They were trying to get at your children.
Yep. And it was only later that I began to realise that this hacking lark was actually taking place on my phones. I'd heard of it. I thought it was something that happened to somebody else or happens in Hollywood.
Well, we thought it was the world of spies.
Yeah. So eventually the police came to me, actually, and there was a gentleman called Glenn Mulcair from News of the World. And on his blotter in his office were all sorts of phone numbers of various people and whatever. But CT, my name, was by my mobile phone number, my landline at home, and also my texts. And they said, and the guy eventually went to prison. I mean, he was done for it, and he was banged up for
what? For having your number? I don't understand.
Not just for having my number, no, because he was found guilty of hacking all sorts of people. Lots and lots and lots of people were hacked. There were periods when, for example, Jim, my driver, is an enormous, wonderful, big bear of a man, lovely guy, huge. And he's been with me for 20, 25 years. And one of my closest friends, the kids all love him. He's just a really good guy. And there was one particular night when I was separated. I took a lady out. I met her for drinks, and then we went for dinner. And there were sort of photographers everywhere we went. And this carried on through the night and through the next morning when I took her to work and so on. And that evening, we'd done Who Wants to Be a Millionaire up at Elstree. And when we were driving home, I said to Jim, I can't understand this. How did they know so much detail about where I was going? I mean, it was quite extraordinary, because the only person I talked to was Jim on the phone. And Jim turned to me, great big lump with tears in his eyes. He said, you've got to think it's me.
Oh.
And I said, you know, I love you, mate. I do think it was you. I can't... There's nobody else.
No other explanation.
No. Yeah. It was only really... And our relationship was pretty grim for quite a long time. As a guy I love, I trusted this guy literally with everything. And he knew so much about me, you know, because we'd spent hundreds of hours together driving home late at night from TV studios, whatever.
I think one of the most awful things about this, and people think, oh, there's a celebrity and he's having a bad time, but all the closest relationships are broken up because the only assumption is not that you've been hacked, but because this person you've known all these years is talking to the press. It's appalling.
I know, and it was with Jim, obviously, but also with my friends, my kids. I didn't trust anybody for weeks until eventually a pattern emerged. I went, oh, my God, that's what's been happening. A horrible time. I mean, it also became a kind of sport because they were just everywhere. I mean, literally, as I say, they were looking in my dustbins. I mean, what are you going to find in a bloke's dustbin? A pair of soiled pants or whatever, God knows. Bless them. I mean, they were always following Jim in my car, and a lot of the time I spent on the back with a blanket over my head. It was quite bizarre, the whole period. But also, quite often, we would switch cars. So Jim would go off with a blanket in the back over a sort of lump, probably a pillow.
Really?
Oh, he took them miles. He took them from Elstree Studios once, convinced that I was in the back of this car, almost down to Canterbury. and he got out and parked up. And, of course, went in for a cup of coffee in the service station. And they all ran to the car, knocking on the window. And went, there's nobody there. So it did become a sport. My favourite moment that I remember from all this is that Jim lives down in Dartford. And, as I say, he's a big old boy. And he got home quite late one night. He dropped me off somewhere and went home. And he was sort of on his way to getting into bed. And there was a knock on the door. Hello, Mr. Luck. And he went, yeah, what is it? I'm trying to sleep. It's the Sun newspaper here, Mr. Luck. We've got a cheque here for £5,000. Someone's going to get it. We want a story about Chris Tarrant. Someone's going to get it. Might as well be you. And Jim went, all right, wait a minute. And I waited for a couple of minutes, and the door burst open, and Jim's holding... Now, Jim is in a vest. He's got his trousers on, he's in a vest, so it's a pretty scary sight. He's got this huge chunk of wood in his hand. And they're going, what are you doing? What are you doing? He went, well, I've got a chunk of wood here. Somebody's going to get it. It might as well be you. And they ran down the street like scalded bunnies. One of the things I remember vividly, because I think it's such a great expression, I was talking to Phil Collins, who'd had a really very bad time with the press chasing him and, all sorts of intrusion, whatever. And I said, do you think these guys, because some of them are doing really illegal, dirty things. Not all of them, but some of them. And I said, do you think they actually realise, the hurt they're causing? And Phil said, the trouble is, they've been down in the so long, they can no longer smell it. Which is an unpleasant idea, but actually it's spot on.
It just becomes the way you do things. And you forget about the moral thing,
It's drinking your gin.
It's going to be a very happy cat soon. When you said, plenty of journalists were decent guys, this is true.
Absolutely.
But the real pressure, the real villains, I think, are the editors, because the editors basically say to them, if you don't do this, you're fired. And they've got a wife and kids and a mortgage, right?
Absolutely.
So it's the editors who seem to me to be the really evil ones. And, of course, you never hear about them because they preserve a kind of anonymity.
Yeah.
But I feel that they must basically be sociopaths to have so little care for other people's feelings. None at all.
I just hope that slowly it's getting better. But there are more and more famous people who are fair game because all this sort of reality... There are so many people now.
Yeah.
When I started, there weren't that many famous people at all.
And there wasn't this atmosphere.
And they actually quite like it.
That was before Murdoch bought the News of the World. Ever since then.
Yeah. And there is this feeling, which I certainly have never subscribed to, like...
Do you think it's all right if I sip out of this, or will I get
well, except for the cat's licked it, but you're very welcome. There's a cat's tongue in it. It'd probably be OK.
Well, it's gin anyway.
Yeah. Oh, here he comes again.
Oh, thank you.
He's a bit of a nuisance, isn't he? He's a very intrusive man.
I don't know where he comes from.
Not like me much, either.
He's a sort of maitre d' around here, but very unpleasant sort of guy. We'll cut this bit out. Right. I'm going to talk to the director about
I think there are people now who just like being famous. So if you're on the front page of one of the tabloids, even if you're being absolutely vilified, it's like, look at me on front page today. Yes, but it says you had sex with your mother. It don't matter, mate, I'm there, I'm up in lights. I think there is quite a lot of that now.
Well, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate you talking to me. God bless.